Hi, I'm Dustin Abbott, and I'm here today to give you my review of the Viltrox Flash. What's this? Yes, for once, it is not a new lens from Viltrox, but they have a brand new flash called the Spark Z3, which is an extremely compact, stylish, on-camera flash with 26 watt-seconds power output, a built-in battery that'll give you 650 full output flash before it runs out, and a price tag of only 55 bucks. If that sounds interesting to you, then stick around and we're going to dive into the performance of this, talk about its strengths and its limitations, and whether or not it is the flash that you should consider. Now, in full disclosure, this flash unit was sent to me by Viltrox for evaluation. However, they have had zero input in this review, and my findings are my own. This is a completely independent review. So let's start with a quick discussion of what this is. This is an on-camera hot shoe flash, as you can see. It can operate in TTL mode and then also as an optical slave unit. However, that is not in TTL. There is no wireless, and so this is going to be triggered optically. But you do have two options here. There's a switch on the side that allows you to switch between S1, which means that it's going to basically work with the pre-flash or the main flash when it's going to be triggered by that, or you can put it into S2 mode. In S2 mode, it's actually going to skip the pre-flash and only flash with the main flash, and so it doesn't interfere with your pre-flash from your main unit. And so it does have a little versatility there. However, there are no wireless protocols built in, and it cannot function as a master unit, again, other than being an optical trigger for something else or a dumb type setup rather than a smart setup. That being said, it does utilize very effective TTL, and so I'm testing the initial unit that's being released, which is for Fuji's TTL protocols, and so this is the Z3-F. But there is upcoming units for Canon, Nikon, and Sony, all available as well. And so if it works as well on those platforms as it did on Fuji, that's encouraging to me because TTL performance seems to be quite excellent at a variety of focus distances, giving me a nice amount of flash without over flashing. Now, you also have the option of using this as a manual flash, and so there is a dial on the back that will allow you to go through 7 steps, and then so you can go from 1/64th output up to 1:1. And so just to give you a quick look at what that looks like, here is from 1/64th, then at 1/32nd, 1/16th, 1/8, 1/4, 1/2, and then full 1:1 output. And so you can see that, it is effectively stepping up the output. And so that means that while this is designed with the TTL protocols for Fuji, you can use it on other flashes or other cameras and other camera systems manually. More on that in the portrait section coming up. So let's talk about the aesthetics along with the physical controls here. They call this Cyberpunk inspired. And so really what that comes down to is some forms and shapes that are molded onto it. But the biggest thing is that on the top, there is a clear window that allows you to see for half of it down into the circuit board of the lens. And so it does give it a stylish look that is definitely a cut above the basic flashes you would expect for this kind of price point. It comes in 2 finishes. I'm testing a little bit more traditional gunmetal gray. There's also a brighter Tundra green. And so if you're really looking to make a statement, you can try out the Tundra green. This weighs in at just 144 grams. And so it's not only a compact form factor, but it's not going to take up too much weight in your camera bag. So all of that is good. Those of you that aren't big fans of the increasing move towards touchscreen controls on a lot of recent flashes are going to love this because we have got the most analog of control systems here. On the back, there is the wheel that I've mentioned that allows you to just rotate, and it says right on it what level of output you're at. By the way, it's great. It works really fast, and so you can very quickly set that. So I have no problem with that. Next to it here, we also have a lever that allows you to switch between it being turned off into automatic or TTL mode, and then to the right, it will rock into the manual mode. So you can control that. As mentioned already, there is a switch on the left side that allows you to go into the slave modes where it's going to be optically triggered by a master unit. There's also on the side, there is that USB-C port that is there, and that USB-C port is what is going to recharge the internal battery. More on that in just a moment. Now, I will note that because there's not a lot of things lighting up on here. There is a single thing that lights up on the top. One, green button that is also just the test trigger, and it will show green when it's ready, red when it's not. However, if you're looking at the back, you're not going to see anything like that. I found that it's not difficult to forget to turn it off because it is just a physical dial. However, it will go into sleep mode after 15 minutes, so it's not entirely dumb. It will go to sleep to preserve the battery life. However, when you come back, you may think your flash is dead. It's not. You just have to power cycle on and off. So you need to go to off and then turn it back on, and then it will be up and ready to go. It actually cycles quite quickly, as we'll get to in just a moment. So, I mean, don't worry, it'll quickly come back alive once you do that. And so outside of that, it's very basic and straightforward. The one thing that's included, which we'll detail in just a moment, is a diffuser, which is hard plastic that just pops over the top of that and will help to scatter the light output for that. So easy to use, easy to bring along. So let's talk about the power and the output. So first about the internal power. This has an 1800 mAh internal battery. And what really impressed me is that this is actually rated up to 650 full 1-to-1 flashes. And so that's a really impressive amount. That's all day use, you know, even for a wedding photographer. And so that's really quite impressive there. And I remember some of the earlier flashes that are, you know, compact flashes that I've reviewed before. I'm accustomed to seeing anywhere between 130 to maybe 200 flashes out of, the batteries that you pop into there. So this is actually really impressive to get that amount of light cycles, and that's 1-to-1. So if you're shooting at anything less than 1-to-1, you know, you could easily go for 1,000 cycles before the battery needs to be recharged. That's pretty impressive. I will also note that the recycled time at 1-to-1 is 1 second, so not bad. So just to give you an idea, if I go to say, let's say 1/8 power output, it's instantly ready to go again. However, if I go all the way to 1-to-1, there's a bit of a pause, 1 second before I'm ready to go again. However, even just going down to 1/2, it's a very quick pause before I can go again. And so a recycle time is pretty impressive for such a small unit like that. Now that internal battery takes 70 minutes to charge, and that's via USB-C. However, it's a really flexible charge. And so anything that can put out 5-volt 2-amp equivalent is going to be able to charge it. And that includes most power banks. And so very flexible in that regard. Now in terms of the output, it is a 26 watt-second output. And that is a very usable amount of light. It's very hard. I researched, and maybe some of you will know how to do it. And if you do, let me know how to basically convert from watt second to a guide number, which is more traditional in flashes this size. I didn't really find an effective way to do that. And so if you know how, please let me know. But basically, that's about a third of the light output of the flashes, full-size flash units that cost hundreds of dollars. And so it's not a massive amount of light, but it's a very usable amount of light in a typical size room, or even shooting outdoors. I found it fine for fill light with a single subject. If you're shooting, backlit outdoors with a group, may not be enough for that, but in a lot of situations it was sufficient, and certainly for many situations indoors, it is plenty of light, assuming that the venue is not too large. Using the diffuser, I found cost about 1.5 stops of light. However, if you can get away with it, do use it, because the light is it's softer, it's more pleasing, I found. It gives it a little bit of a warmer feel, and so it's just less harsh. And of course, that is the main problem with a flash unit like this. So how about for portrait work? As noted, it is enough flash to be able to do some of the key things that I want to do, which is mostly around filling. So in this particular series, I was shooting midday in August, and so about 1 p.m., and so the light is very harsh. So I wanted to put the subject in the shade for the setting, but it also meant that the background that wasn't in the shade would be very bright. So being able to use some fill light to balance that to where the background isn't blown out, I found to be very useful, and I got pleasing results in that kind of setting. I also moved into a full-length setting where I was needing more light output, but I found that I got decent results in that setting. The images look the way that I wanted, with just enough fill light to where it still looks natural. Doesn't look too different from available light, other than the subject is better filled against the background. It also helps with a little bit more subject isolation in that setting. I did a series with my son Ryan right before he went off for university and found that in shooting in a variety of settings, I got good metering. And so it wasn't overpowered or underpowered, but nicely filled. So that looked good. I also found in that setting that, for example, with this shot with the ivy, because you can't direct the light, it's just like this. It was important to, instead of shooting like this, where the flash would illuminate the ivy on the left, I needed to rotate like this to make sure that the flash lighting was staying outside of that. So, you don't have as much control over positioning the light, so you may need to do a little bit of that through the physical controlling. I did also shoot with it on a manual mode on a Sony camera, just to see what that was like. And so obviously it's a little bit of trial and error unless you're an expert with strobing. And so, I meant that I got some bad results like this, but I also got some really beautiful results like these, for example. And, if I zoom into one of those, you can see that, it's tiny, but you can see that little catch light in there. And so that certainly was nice. Now, limited downsides here is that there's limited ways to modify that light. There is no bouncing, there's no tilting, there's no rotating. So a lot of the ways that I like to use a flash, I can't do. And so I don't love it for that. I also found that last series I showed on Sony, I was using a really big lens. In this case, it was the Sigma 200mm f2. So it's a fairly squat lens. And so I did feel like, because I can't adjust the light, that with a thicker lens coming out there, it was blocking some of the light, and that had a negative impact on some of the images. And so, just be aware of that. So let's talk about some of the things that I like. It is a very usable amount of power for such an inexpensive flash. It's not a massive amount of light, but it's a very usable amount of light, far, far more than what you might expect for a typical built-in flash or most compact flash units. And so I felt like it was a very decent amount of light for the form factor here. I also appreciated that while the controls aren't complex, they are effective. They're simple but effective. And a lot of these compact units, you don't really have any controls built into the flash unit itself. So I liked having controls. I liked having manual controls because that meant that while it may not be optimal, I can use it on basically any camera system. And as long as I dial in the right amount of light, no problem. And so that was appreciated. I also appreciated that when you're shooting it on the correct platform, in this case Fuji, TTL seemed to work very well. I didn't end up with any situations where I felt like that the flashlight was either too much or too little, but it seemed to be just right all the time. And so that is great. I appreciate the very, very effective amount of battery life here. The fact that you can get enough shots out of a charge to basically last all day, even in heavy duty shooting. And so that's great and unexpected in a flash unit this size. I also appreciate that the USB-C and the relatively modest power requirements for that means that it's very easy to recharge. If you have a power bank along with you, you can recharge it and so that you can keep going. And with the 70-minute recharge time, that's for a full recharge. Even if you only had half of that time, let's say if you're driving to a different location, you put it on and you charged, you really could extend your shooting, almost indefinitely with just a little bit of chunks of time like that. Of course, I have to point out that it's extremely inexpensive. It's a very low risk investment. With a discount code, you can get it for right over $50. That's provides tremendous value, as long as the flash itself is sufficient for what you need. I'll give them points for a stylish design. It doesn't look like every other flash unit out there, so bonus there. I also appreciate the fact that we've got a sturdy connection here. It's just a wheel style, but it feels tough and durable. And so it takes all the guesswork out of there. It's just, you lock it in. It's not moving anywhere, and this doesn't feel like it's going to break anytime soon. And I know some of you have had concerns with the plastic locking tabs on some of the other flash units that I've tested before. This feels pretty sturdy here, so all of that is good. How about things that I don't like? Well, biggest things that I don't like is that you've got a limited way to use this flash. There's no tilt, there's no bounce, there's no pivoting, and so that just means that there are fewer ways to modify the light, there are fewer ways to control the light, and thus, my second thing I don't like, there are fewer ways to avoid the worst aspects of flashing, namely getting, reflections on shiny surfaces, that kind of flashed look that isn't natural. And so it's harder to avoid that with this, even with that little modifier. And then of course, this is more of a nitpick in a unit this inexpensive, but there are no master controls. And so this is not a gateway to controlling more complex flashes unless you're just using on an optical trigger, which is not not really what you want. And so there are so many great ways to get wireless control over multiple flashes at this point, and the Spark Z3 is not the way to achieve that. So my conclusion is that if you're serious about strobing, you'll probably almost certainly want a more sophisticated, flexible unit than the Viltrox Spark Z3 flash unit. But if you're looking for an inexpensive and kind of stylish way to add a little bit of lighting versatility to your kit, then it does stand out as being a really strong value. It has a generous amount of light output, it looks cool, it packs enough internal power to last all day. And I also appreciate the fact that, of course, it weighs in at only 144 grams. And so even if you just keep it in your camera bag, the fact that it has great built-in power, unlike using, say, just rechargeable AA batteries in a flash, I always found with flash units like that, if they sat in my bag for a few months, by the time I went to use them, the batteries are basically dead. Something about these internal cells that holds a charge much, much longer. So you can throw it in your bag, it's light enough to forget about it, and then just pull it out when you need it. And I think that is really the most useful application for this. Of course, the fact that it is so inexpensive means that it's a low-risk investment in something that maybe you don't use all the time, but there will be moments you say, hey, I'm glad I had that. And if that sounds like a possibility for you, then check out the Viltrox Spark Z3 flash unit. More information could be found by looking the description down below. As always, thanks for watching, have a great day, and let the light in.